The origins and founding of Zoroastrianism trace back to approximately 1500–1000 BCE, during a time when ancient Indo-Iranian tribes inhabited the regions of Central Asia and the Iranian plateau. This period marks the life and teachings of Zarathustra, known to the Greeks as Zoroaster, who is recognized as the founder and prophet of the Zoroastrian faith. While the exact dates and location of his life are debated by scholars, a widely accepted view places him somewhere in eastern Iran, or perhaps in parts of present-day Afghanistan or Central Asia. Zarathustra emerged in a cultural and religious landscape dominated by polytheistic beliefs, rituals involving animal sacrifices, and the veneration of numerous nature deities. In opposition to these traditional Indo-Iranian religious practices, Zarathustra introduced a radically new vision centered around the worship of a single, supreme god, Ahura Mazda, meaning wise lord. According to Zarathustra, Ahura Mazda was the eternal, omniscient, and benevolent creator of the universe, who represented all that is good and just. One of Zarathustra's key theological contributions was the concept of cosmic dualism, the idea that existence is a constant struggle between two opposing forces, Asha, truth, order, and righteousness, and Druj, falsehood, chaos, and evil. Human beings, he taught, are not passive observers but active participants in this cosmic battle, endowed with free will to choose between good and evil. This moral choice would ultimately determine the fate of their souls in the afterlife. Zarathustra expressed his teachings in a series of poetic hymns called the Gathas, which form the oldest and most sacred part of the Zoroastrian holy text, the Avesta. The Gathas are written in an ancient dialect of the Avestan language and are deeply philosophical, addressing questions of ethics, metaphysics, and divine justice. These hymns emphasize individual responsibility, ethical living, and the importance of cultivating good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. Unlike many religious founders who built large institutions or codified doctrines during their lifetime, Zarathustra's influence initially spread through oral tradition and personal teaching. His movement may have started as a small group of followers and gained broader acceptance only later, especially after his teachings were adopted by powerful Iranian dynasties. The religion he founded marked one of the earliest forms of ethical monotheism and had a profound impact on later religious traditions, especially those of the Abrahamic faiths. Zarathustra's revolutionary vision of a moral universe governed by a single god who judged individuals based on their deeds rather than their sacrifices or tribal status laid the foundation for a spiritual and ethical system that endured for millennia. During the Achaemenid Empire, which lasted from approximately 550 to 330 BCE, Zoroastrianism rose to prominence as a major religious and ideological force, largely due to its close association with the ruling dynasty. Founded by Cyrus the Great, the Achaemenid Empire was the first great Persian empire, and at its height extended from the Indus Valley in the east to the Balkans and Eastern Europe in the west. Although it is debated whether Cyrus himself was a strict Zoroastrian, his policies and inscriptions suggest that he respected Ahura Mazda and adhered to certain Zoroastrian principles, particularly those related to justice, truth, and the orderly governance of the world. It was under Darius I, who ruled from 522 to 486 BCE, that Zoroastrianism became more clearly integrated into the imperial ideology. Darius explicitly declared his devotion to Ahura Mazda in his inscriptions, most notably in the Behistun inscription, where he attributes his kingship and military victories to the will of Ahura Mazda. These inscriptions also promote Zoroastrian ethical values, such as truthfulness, order, and piety, and portray Darius as a just ruler fighting against the forces of falsehood and chaos. The king's legitimacy was closely tied to his role as a defender of Asha, the cosmic order upheld by Ahura Mazda. Despite its growing prominence, Zoroastrianism during the Achaemenid period was not yet a rigidly codified or centralized religion. It remained flexible and was practiced in diverse ways across the vast empire. The Achaemenid rulers practiced a relatively tolerant policy toward other religions, allowing subject peoples to worship their own gods and maintain their own customs. This religious tolerance is evident in the treatment of the Jews, whom Cyrus the Great allowed to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple after the Babylonian captivity. Fire, an important symbol of purity and the divine presence in Zoroastrianism, gained ceremonial prominence during this time, though the elaborate fire temple rituals that would characterize later Zoroastrianism had not yet fully developed. It is likely that altars and simple temples existed, but there is limited archaeological evidence from this early period. Religious practices probably included prayers, offerings, and recitations of hymns from the oral tradition of the Avesta. Priests, known as magi, played an important role in the religious life of the Achaemenid court and the broader society. These magi likely came from Median origins and may have influenced the religious syncretism that characterized Zoroastrianism at this time. They performed rituals, advised kings, and maintained religious knowledge, contributing to the spread and adaptation of Zoroastrian ideas throughout the empire. The integration of Zoroastrian themes into royal ideology helped legitimize the Achaemenid monarchy and provided a moral and cosmic framework for governance. Kings ruled not just by military might, but as divinely sanctioned agents of order, fighting against the forces of chaos. This vision of kingship would endure and influence later Iranian empires. When Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire in the late 4th century BCE, he brought an abrupt end to Achaemenid rule. Many Zoroastrian texts and temples were destroyed in the chaos of conquest, leading to a period of decline and fragmentation for the religion. However, the foundations laid during the Achaemenid era, particularly the association of Ahura Mazda with righteous kingship and cosmic order, continued to influence Persian identity and Zoroastrian practice in the centuries to come. The Hellenistic period, spanning from 330 to 247 BCE, marked a time of significant transformation and cultural blending in the ancient Near East, including within the realm of Zoroastrianism. This era began with the conquest of the Achaemenid Empire by Alexander the Great in 330 BCE. The fall of the Persian Empire brought about the dissolution of many of its institutions, including those that supported Zoroastrian religious practices and structures. Temples were destroyed, sacred texts were lost or scattered, and the priestly class, which had been influential under the Achaemenids, lost much of its authority and support. Alexander and his successors, particularly the Seleucid dynasty which ruled Persia after his death, introduced Greek language, customs, political structures, and religious ideas into the region. This Hellenization process resulted in a degree of syncretism, where Greek and Iranian cultural elements began to merge. While Greek polytheism did not replace Zoroastrianism outright, it challenged the religious landscape by promoting a pantheon of gods and philosophical ideas that differed sharply from the monotheistic and dualistic worldview of Zoroaster. During this period, Zoroastrianism persisted largely through oral tradition and local practice rather than centralized institutions. The Magi, or Zoroastrian priests, continued to serve in rural and regional contexts, preserving rituals and teachings as best they could in the absence of state sponsorship. However, the disruption caused by the Macedonian conquest meant that many of the Avesta texts were either lost or remained uncollected, as there was no royal initiative to compile or protect them as had occurred under the Achaemenids. The political instability of the Seleucid Empire, along with its administrative challenges in governing such a vast and culturally diverse territory, created a religious environment in which Zoroastrianism had to adapt to survive. In areas far from the centers of Greek power, particularly in eastern Iran and Central Asia, Zoroastrian beliefs remained strong. These regions became crucial for the faith's preservation, as communities maintained traditional rituals, upheld belief in Ahura Mazda, and resisted full Hellenistic assimilation. Moreover, elements of Zoroastrian thought may have influenced some Hellenistic philosophical schools, especially those grappling with dualism and moral ethics. Greek philosophers and writers occasionally referenced Zoroaster as a wise and mystical figure, even if they misunderstood or reinterpreted his teachings through a Hellenic lens. This helped to preserve Zoroaster's name in the broader intellectual tradition, though not always accurately. By the end of the Hellenistic period, Zoroastrianism had managed to endure, albeit in a decentralized and weakened state. The lack of a powerful Zoroastrian-aligned state left the religion vulnerable, but its deep roots among the Iranian people and its adaptability enabled it to survive. This resilience would become especially important in the following centuries, as new Iranian dynasties, such as the Parthians, would provide a more favorable environment for Zoroastrianism to begin rebuilding its influence and structure. During the Parthian Empire, which lasted from 247 BCE to 224 CE, Zoroastrianism continued to survive and evolve, although it did not become a centralized or officially codified religion under Parthian rule. The Parthians, also known as the Arsacids, were a semi-nomadic Iranian people who overthrew the Seleucid Greeks and established their own rule across a vast region that included much of modern-day Iran, Mesopotamia, and parts of Central Asia. Their governance style was decentralized, with a confederation-like structure that gave significant autonomy to local rulers and regions. This political fragmentation also influenced the religious landscape, including the practice of Zoroastrianism. Unlike the Achaemenids or the later Sasanians, the Parthians did not actively impose a unified state religion. As a result, Zoroastrianism remained a loosely organized tradition during this period. Local variations of the religion flourished, often blending with regional customs and beliefs. The absence of a central clerical authority or a standardized version of the Avesta meant that Zoroastrianism existed in many different forms across the empire. In some regions, especially in eastern Iran and Parthia proper, more traditional and orthodox practices were maintained, while in others, particularly in Mesopotamia, there may have been greater syncretism with Hellenistic and Mesopotamian religious elements. Despite this lack of centralization, Zoroastrianism remained culturally significant. The Magi, or priestly caste, retained their religious functions and were influential in court rituals and aristocratic households. Fire, representing purity, and the presence of Ahura Mazda continued to be an important symbol in religious life. Fire altars and sanctuaries were likely maintained, though there is limited archaeological evidence from this period to confirm their precise structure or usage. Religious practices likely centered on oral transmission of sacred hymns, ritual, purity, and seasonal festivals such as Nowruz, the Persian New Year, which had deep Zoroastrian roots. One of the most important developments during the Parthian period was the gradual compilation and preservation of Zoroastrian texts. While the Avesta was still not fully written down, portions of it were maintained through oral transmission by trained priests. Some scholars believe that parts of the young Avesta may have been composed or elaborated during this time, incorporating legal, ritual, and cosmological content that reflected the evolving needs of Zoroastrian communities. The Parthians also contributed to the gradual strengthening of Iranian identity, in which Zoroastrianism played a central role. Although religious pluralism was common, Zoroastrian ideology increasingly became associated with Iranian cultural heritage and resistance to foreign domination, particularly in contrast to the Greek and later Roman influences. Zoroaster himself was revered as a prophet of Iranian tradition, and his teachings were seen as a source of moral and spiritual authority that distinguished Iranians from their foreign rulers. By the end of the Parthian Empire, Zoroastrianism had endured as the dominant religious tradition in many Iranian regions, even if it lacked formal state sponsorship or institutional coherence. The seeds for a more organized religious structure had been sown, and the religion retained a strong enough foundation to experience a dramatic revival under the next Iranian dynasty, the Sasanians, who would transform Zoroastrianism into a powerful state religion and consolidate its doctrines, scriptures, and rituals. The Sasanian Empire, which lasted from 224 to 651 CE, represents the pinnacle of Zoroastrianism as an organized, state-sponsored religion. With the rise of the Sasanians, who overthrew the Parthians and established a centralized Iranian monarchy, Zoroastrianism was elevated to an unprecedented level of institutional and political power. The Sasanians saw themselves as the rightful heirs of the Achaemenids and sought to restore Iran's cultural and religious heritage, with Zoroastrianism playing a central role in legitimizing their rule. From the beginning of the dynasty, especially under Ardashir I, the founder of the Sasanian Empire, Zoroastrianism was promoted as the empire's official religion. Ardashir aligned himself closely with the Zoroastrian priesthood, particularly with the Magi class, and worked to unify the diverse and loosely practiced forms of the religion that had persisted under the Parthians. He established a partnership with the powerful priest Kartir, who helped define the orthodox structure of Sasanian Zoroastrianism and who left inscriptions describing the spread and enforcement of the faith. Under Kartir and his successors, the Magi gained considerable influence, and a structured hierarchy of clergy began to take shape, with priests overseeing temples, rituals, legal matters, and education. One of the most significant religious accomplishments of the Sasanian era was the formal compilation of the Avesta, the sacred scriptures of Zoroastrianism. The texts were organized, redacted, and transcribed, drawing upon oral traditions that had survived from earlier centuries. The resulting canon included the Gathas, hymns attributed to Zoroaster himself, as well as later texts covering liturgy, cosmology, law, and ethics. The language of the Avesta was maintained in its sacred form, while commentaries, known as the Zend, were written in Middle Persian, Pahlavi, to make the texts more accessible to priests and the educated elite. The Sasanian state also standardized religious rituals, temple structures, and the role of fire in worship. Fire temples, with sacred fires that were meticulously maintained by priests, became central institutions in towns and cities across the empire. The fire itself symbolized purity and the presence of Ahura Mazda, and three main grades of fire, Atash Dadga, Atash Adaran, and Atash Behram, represented different levels of sanctity and ritual complexity. The maintenance of these fires and the performance of purification ceremonies became core functions of the Zoroastrian clergy. Zoroastrianism under the Sasanians was more than a religion. It was a framework for governance and law. The dualistic worldview of the religion, based on the struggle between the forces of good, Asha, and evil, Daruj, was mirrored in the Sasanian conception of kingship. The king, or Shahanshah, was seen as chosen by Ahura Mazda to uphold cosmic and social order. Moral and spiritual righteousness were integrated with royal duty, and the king's legitimacy depended on his ability to defend the faith, administer justice, and promote truth. Despite the centrality of Zoroastrianism, the Sasanians ruled over a diverse empire that included Christians, Jews, Buddhists, and others. While the early Sasanian rulers were relatively tolerant, this changed over time, particularly during the reigns of Yazdegerd I, Bahram V, and other later kings, when religious persecution of non-Zoroastrians increased. Christian communities, in particular, faced harsh treatment during periods of tension with the Roman Empire, especially when Christianity had become the state religion of Rome. Zoroastrian theology also developed during this period, incorporating elaborate cosmological and eschatological ideas. The universe was seen as a battlefield between Ahura Mazda and the evil spirit Angra Mainyu, Ahriman, with the final victory of good assured at the end of time. Concepts such as individual judgment after death, heaven and hell, and the resurrection of the dead became more clearly defined and systematized. By the 6th and early 7th centuries, Zoroastrianism had reached its institutional zenith. However, the empire faced growing internal problems, including dynastic strife, heavy taxation, and declining support among the population. The final blow came with the Arab-Muslim conquest of Persia in the mid-7th century. The defeat of the Sasanian Empire and the death of Yazdegerd III marked the collapse of Zoroastrian political power. Although the religion continued to be practiced for centuries afterward, especially by communities that resisted conversion to Islam, the end of the Sasanian dynasty signaled the beginning of Zoroastrianism's decline as a dominant force in the Iranian Plateau. The Islamic conquest of Persia in the 7th century marked a profound turning point in the history of Zoroastrianism, leading to its gradual decline as the dominant religion of the Iranian plateau. The process began in earnest following the Arab-Muslim victory over the Sasanian Empire at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah in 636 CE, and was solidified with the death of the last Sasanian king, Yazdegerd III, in 651 CE. This defeat not only ended the political independence of the Persian Empire, but also dismantled the institutional and clerical support that had sustained Zoroastrianism for centuries under the Sasanians. The early Muslim conquerors, following the teachings of Islam, did not forcibly convert Zoroastrians en masse, but treated them as dhimmis, or protected people, much like Christians and Jews. This status allowed Zoroastrians to continue practicing their religion, but it came with certain conditions. They had to pay a special tax called jizya, were restricted in their public religious expressions, and were excluded from certain positions of power and influence. Over time, these constraints created strong social and economic incentives for conversion to Islam, especially for those seeking to avoid the tax burden or to advance in the new Islamic administrative system. Initially, many Zoroastrian communities tried to preserve their traditions and institutions. Temples and fire altars continued to operate in some regions, and priests sought to maintain religious education and rituals. However, without imperial backing, the religion gradually lost its infrastructure and cohesion. Many fire temples were destroyed or repurposed, and the transmission of sacred texts became increasingly difficult. The Magi, who had once formed a powerful and centralized priesthood under the Sasanians, became fragmented and localized, with diminishing authority and resources. Social and political pressures further accelerated the decline. Converts to Islam often received material and legal advantages, and over generations, intermarriage, cultural assimilation, and loss of institutional memory led many formerly Zoroastrian families to adopt the new faith. Additionally, instances of persecution, while not uniform or constant, did occur under certain caliphs or local rulers who imposed stricter policies against non-Muslims. These included forced conversions, destruction of temples, or limitations on Zoroastrian worship. Despite this, some Zoroastrian communities managed to endure, particularly in more remote or isolated areas such as Yazd and Kerman in central Iran. These regions became important centers for the preservation of the faith, its rituals, and its literature. It was during this period, likely between the 8th and 10th centuries, that many Zoroastrian texts were written down or recopied in Middle Persian Pahlavi, such as the Denkard, Bundahishan, and Arda Viraf Namak. These works preserved theological, cosmological, and legal aspects of the religion, ensuring that the core teachings of Zoroaster were not entirely lost. One of the most significant developments during this era of decline was the migration of Zoroastrian groups to India. Seeking religious freedom and refuge from the increasing pressures in Iran, some Zoroastrians crossed the sea and settled in the western coastal region of Gujarat. There they established what would become the Parsi community. The Parsis preserved their faith with great care, maintaining their religious texts, rituals, and fire temples, and eventually played an important role in the religious and cultural revival of Zoroastrianism in later centuries. By the end of the 10th century, Zoroastrianism had been reduced to a minority religion within Iran. Its followers were scattered, its institutions diminished, and its influence eclipsed by the dominance of Islam. Yet, the religion endured, sustained by the devotion of its followers in both Iran and India, preserving a spiritual tradition that had once shaped one of the greatest empires of the ancient world. From the 10th century onward, Zoroastrianism entered a long period of survival and adaptation, marked by migration, cultural preservation, and resilience in the face of ongoing marginalization. After centuries of decline in Iran following the Islamic conquest, many Zoroastrians sought refuge outside the country to preserve their faith and traditions. The most significant migration occurred when a group of Zoroastrians fled to the western coast of India, arriving in Gujarat. There they were granted asylum by local Hindu rulers, under the condition that they would adopt certain local customs, while maintaining their religion. These immigrants and their descendants became known as the Parsis, meaning Persians, and they established a thriving Zoroastrian community that would eventually become one of the most influential religious minorities in India. In India, the Parsis were able to freely practice their religion, rebuild fire temples, and preserve their sacred texts and rituals without the fear of persecution. Over time, they integrated into Indian society, adopting Gujarati as their primary language and adapting aspects of their dress and customs. Yet they remained committed to maintaining their religious identity, particularly through endogamy, fire rituals, seasonal festivals, and priestly training. The Parsi community became especially prominent during the British colonial era, when many Parsis took advantage of educational and economic opportunities to become leaders in business, science, and philanthropy. Families such as the Tatas and Godrais emerged as household names, and the Parsi community played a vital role in the modernization of India. Meanwhile, in Iran, the remaining Zoroastrians faced continuing challenges. Though their numbers diminished, they managed to survive primarily in isolated regions like Yazd and Kerman. These areas became strongholds of religious continuity, where families maintained traditional practices and preserved religious manuscripts. However, Zoroastrians in Iran were still subject to legal discrimination, social ostracism, and economic hardship. They were often limited in the types of work they could pursue, faced restrictions on public worship, and were subject to higher taxes. Despite these difficulties, the community remained resilient, keeping the sacred fire alive and transmitting knowledge through generations. The 19th and early 20th centuries brought new forms of revival and connection. Increased contact between Iranian Zoroastrians and the Parsi community in India led to mutual support. Parsis helped fund schools, religious institutions, and social services for their co-religionists in Iran, sparking a cultural and educational renaissance. This transnational connection helped Iranian Zoroastrians reclaim aspects of their heritage and strengthen their community, even under restrictive conditions. In the 20th century, especially after the Pahlavi dynasty came to power in Iran in 1925, Zoroastrians were granted greater rights and recognition. Under Reza Shah and later Mohammad Reza Shah, religious minorities were somewhat protected and encouraged to participate in national life. Zoroastrians were allowed to hold public office, and their cultural contributions were recognized as part of Iran's pre-Islamic heritage. However, the 1979 Islamic Revolution brought renewed anxiety. Although the new Islamic Republic officially recognized Zoroastrians as a religious minority, many emigrated due to fears of repression or loss of freedoms. Significant numbers moved to North America, Europe, and Australia, forming diaspora communities that continue to practice their faith in secular environments. Today, Zoroastrianism is a small but globally dispersed religion. The largest communities are in India, Parsis, Iran, and diaspora populations in countries such as the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. Although the overall population is estimated to be between 100,000 and 150,000, the religion continues to be practiced with devotion. Key traditions such as Nowruz, New Year, Gahambars, seasonal festivals, and fire temple worship remain central. However, concerns about declining numbers due to low birth rates, intermarriage, and strict rules on conversion have prompted debates within the community about how to preserve the faith in the modern world. Despite these challenges, Zoroastrianism remains a deeply influential religion in terms of its historical legacy. It continues to inspire interest for its ethical teachings, dualistic cosmology, and its profound impact on other major world religions such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. From ancient Persia to modern diaspora centers, the story of Zoroastrianism is one of endurance, adaptation, and an ongoing commitment to the principles of truth, order, and righteousness. In the modern era, spanning the high 19th to the 21st centuries, Zoroastrianism has undergone a complex journey of revival, adaptation, and existential concern. During this period, the religion faced both new opportunities and significant challenges brought about by globalization, colonial influence, technological change, and shifting demographics. While Zoroastrianism's overall numbers have steadily declined, its intellectual and cultural visibility has grown in both academic and popular spheres. In the 19th century, the Parsi community in India entered a period of remarkable prosperity and influence. Under British colonial rule, the Parsis embraced Western education, English language proficiency, and industrial entrepreneurship. As a result, they became one of the wealthiest and most socially advanced communities in India. Prominent Parsi figures like Jamsetji Tata, the founder of the Tata Group, and Dadabhai Naoroji, the first Indian member of the British Parliament, played leading roles in shaping modern India's economy and political consciousness. Parsi philanthropists funded hospitals, schools, libraries, and religious institutions both in India and Iran. Their charitable contributions extended beyond their community and significantly impacted Indian society as a whole. At the same time, the Parsi community grew increasingly concerned about the preservation of their religion. Debates emerged over the definition of Zoroastrian identity, particularly on issues like intermarriage, conversion, and gender roles in religious leadership. Traditionally, Zoroastrianism had been an ethno-religious tradition passed down patrilineally, and many community leaders insisted that only children of Zoroastrian fathers could be initiated. This stance excluded many potential adherents, especially in the context of modern, multicultural societies where intermarriage became common. These internal debates, unresolved to this day, have significantly affected efforts to grow or even sustain the population. Meanwhile, in Iran, the situation was more precarious. Under the Qajar dynasty in the 19th century, Zoroastrians were often subject to social discrimination and legal inferiority. They were confined to specific quarters, had limited access to education and employment, and were subjected to harassment. This prompted many Iranian Zoroastrians to seek assistance from the Parsi community in India. Figures like Manekji Limji, Hataria, a Parsi reformer and envoy, traveled to Iran to advocate for the rights of Zoroastrians and helped establish schools and institutions that greatly improved conditions for the Iranian community. The 20th century brought important political changes. During the reign of the Pahlavi dynasty, 1925 to 1979, efforts were made to revive Iran's pre-Islamic cultural heritage, which included honoring Zoroastrian contributions to Iranian identity. Under Reza Shah and later his son Mohammad Reza Shah, Zoroastrians were granted more civil rights and opportunities to participate in public life. This led to a modest revival of community life and public recognition. However, the 1979 Islamic Revolution marked another turning point. Although Zoroastrians were recognized as a protected religious minority under the new Islamic Republic, many faced renewed discrimination, restrictions on religious expression, and limitations in education and employment. As a result, significant numbers emigrated, especially to the United States, Canada, Australia, and Europe. In the diaspora, Zoroastrian communities have worked to preserve their faith while adapting to secular and multicultural societies. New associations, such as the Federation of Zoroastrian Associations of North America, FEZANA, have provided platforms for community building, intergenerational dialogue, and religious education. The diaspora has also led to the emergence of more inclusive approaches to identity, with some groups advocating for the acceptance of converts and children of mixed parentage. Despite these efforts, the 21st century has brought pressing concerns. Zoroastrianism is considered one of the world's smallest major religions, with estimates ranging from 100,000 to 150,000 adherents globally. Both the Parsi and Iranian communities face demographic decline due to aging populations, low birth rates, and emigration. Endogamy policies have further reduced the number of potential new members. These trends have sparked intense debate about the future of the faith, whether it should remain exclusive or open itself to broader inclusion. Yet, alongside these challenges, there has also been a renewed scholarly and cultural interest in Zoroastrianism. Its influence on Judaism, Christianity, and Islam is widely acknowledged, particularly in concepts such as angels, heaven and hell, the final judgment, and the cosmic struggle between good and evil. Academic programs, publications, documentaries, and even museum exhibitions have helped bring attention to the religion's historical significance and philosophical depth. Some young Zoroastrians, particularly in the diaspora, are working to reinterpret their tradition in ways that resonate with modern values, such as gender equality, environmentalism, and interfaith dialogue. In summary, the modern era has been a time of both flourishing and fragility for Zoroastrianism. From the heights of Parsi prosperity in colonial and post-colonial India to the quiet perseverance of Iranian communities and the evolving challenges of the diaspora, the religion continues to survive against great odds. Whether it can reverse its demographic decline and adapt to the demands of the contemporary world remains an open question, but its legacy as one of the oldest and most influential spiritual traditions in human history is firmly secure.